Welcome back to the Japanese Empire, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 9.11. So let's just continue this. I did a bunch of moving aircraft around to new air bases and that kind of stuff, so I've saved it just before starting this because we're going to click put pressure on Siam. I think let's read this quickly. The fall of France and the growing power of the Axis offer because the reason I'm reading this is because I'm so not used to ever clicking this. I've never clicked this in this thing, and we need to learn about it. Perfect opportunity to pressure Siam into joining our expansive alliance. Siam lost control of Laos and Cambodia to France in 1893 and was forced to cede parts of Malacca Peninsula to Britain in 1908. With a little prodding, they should prove eager to avenge these losses. Okay. Yeah. Not exactly sure, and I may have heard Siam, Thailand. I don't know exactly the name change, but it was, as they're intimating, they didn't quite say, an empire. And the reason I say empire because it is a multicultural, shall we say. And I don't, obviously this is a reasonable approximation of the border in 1936 or whatever. But we have the Kramer people here, which are, I do believe, and I've talked on, it was on a live stream, and I don't know if I've ever, I think it may have been on, I think I saved it, but in a non-recorded for YouTube part, talked about how little we really know about what is race, and not in the sort of weird Nazi sense of measuring skulls, but as in genetics, and we're still learning a lot. But my limited understanding is that the Kramer people are a different race than the sort of Siamese people, but definitely a different culture. They speak a different language, as far as I know. And the Laotians are also various tribal groups that are different. And it's been a long time since I remember reading about whatever. But, the tribes that are here are very different than the tribes that are down here. And this is all, this is jungly here, but this is actually all rather mountainous. That's why the border of Vietnam, which I think the Vietnamese are more... well, there was Chinese, but maybe a bit more Chinese descent migration, but way ancient, so that they're not like, oh yeah, we moved down here 200 years ago. I'm thinking many, many years ago, the Vietnamese people, which are sort of coastal, and there's a mountain ridge coming down here. And so, that's all very different. So Siam had been, rather bit of an empire, pushing down into here. Now, I don't know, just how far they got down here in actual fact. Because there's always like, yeah, we claimed this, big splooge of country, but how much do they tax and regulate and control and all that kind of thing? Because you have the Malay pirates and all this kind of tribal groups going on for many hundreds of years before the Europeans ever showed up that were battling and pirating and whatnot each other. So, because it's very, very true that the Dutch didn't show up and find a country that was reasonably well organized, but technologically not as military advanced, and they came in and took it. No, it was, this group fighting this group, who's fighting this group. It was all kinds of stuff, and they just slowly, over time, put it into some semblance of order and authority. Not making any judgments on, how humanely they did that at the, different stages in history, but that's what they did. And so, but Siam was much more of a orderly empire, and it is obviously one of the great success stories in the world, because we have to look at it. It wasn't until really the Japanese sort of occupation or whatnot did it finally, and it wasn't taken over by European powers, taken over basically. And I say that because I think in a practical sense the Japanese took it over. Again, I'm not an expert on the Japanese occupation, but it is more like Slovakia is, to my understanding, to Germany's puppet states versus, Romania or Bulgaria. So, yeah, and, it was, quite honestly, and the reason there's several reasons it lasted. One is geography. That is important. But also it was reasonably well organized, so that, okay, how do I put this? When you have a big trading empire that Britain had, and other people, other nations as well, but you have a big trading empire, and your ships need to sail through an area, and they keep getting attacked. Well, eventually, the power is going to go, who's attacking us? Oh, we'll go in and punish them. Next year, they're back attacking us again. See, if you keep doing it long enough, you keep poking the empire long enough, the empire is going to come in and organize you up, meaning taking you over. But if you can go into a diplomatic situation and say, oh, we've got information that ships that are in territory that you claim that is attacking us, if this continues, you're going to have a war with us. You better stop it, or you're going to have a war with us, and you won't like the outcome. Even if you succeed in defending yourself, it will obviously cost you a lot more in lives and money and whatnot than it will for you to go in and organize up the territory and stop the pirating. I mean, that's part of what's going on. That is part of, this is why I'm not doubting the idea that they claimed down into here, but I'm doubting how well they had it organized up because of some of my other reading. That was, some of the Spratly Islands that are somewhere in here, and, the little mini things that weren't inhabited full-time but were used as raiding headquarters for some of the tribes from various parts in and around, not just Malaya, but these other regions. So, I have to wonder about that, and so that's why the situation with Siam, and they had lost territory, and it wasn't just, that's the and I don't know the details, so I can't really cite them, so maybe I shouldn't even say this, but I'm going to anyways. Live dangerously. It wasn't just European greed. I mean, that's what everybody's putting everything down to in modern schools and modern education. European greed and sucking up more and more territory. And there's definitely, that is an element of things. I am not in any way saying this, but it is also various banditry and other things, because I don't know what, but I really have to wonder what is so, we've got to have Laos. Laos is like going to be the jewel in the French crown. It's going to make us so much money selling them something. They've got money that you want. Or, oh, we're going to get so much resources from them. Okay, we see some metal of whatever format there. I don't know whether that's really steel or iron or whatever, or just the idea of a metal resource, copper or some other thing that doesn't quite maybe come into a rare material, but I wouldn't put copper into rare materials, normally speaking, at least. So, and there's some more up here, it looks like. I really don't think, oh no, I guess that is up here. It's actually in the wrong position for here. So I really don't think this was some grandiose France needed more territory kind of thing. I may be entirely wrong by this, but I think this is more the idea that they're sitting here organizing up, which is a much more developed part of the world, and for tax money. And sure, you hand out French francs that, goes or whatever through the circulation system, but it's something that's, it's a worthy economic thing. And you also have much easier coastal access, because like you remember, I've talked about the mountains. Dien Bien Phu is, I think sort of here, maybe here, or somewhere up in these mountains, because these are actually I guess they just figured it's more jungle than mountain to, if we can only be one, jungle or mountain as opposed to jungle mountains, creating a new territorial thing that has, the negative aspects of both. But it's somewhere up here. If you look at the stuff, it isn't like easy conquer, where here it's like, hey, we've got boats. We can sail along and stop and, send in troops and take what we want, And so there is reasons to do that. But I also do believe a lot of the reasons that they moved into here is to protect shipping. But it's also, economic. So, yeah, and sure, down here, this part of Cambodia is... I was going to say nicer, and I don't know that nicer is the word. More easily economically developed and controlled than getting back up into the territories here. But it's sort of like, if you're constantly having bandits and conflicts around on your border, eventually you get tired of it and you decide to go and organize up the territory. And yeah, I'm using that term, and I think it's an appropriate term, organizing the territory. So yeah, that sort of, and I know Azad, who's an Indian and a very proud Indian nationalist, disagrees with, how do I put this? Not my view of how they've done it, but sort of why they did it, or whether they should do it or something, because obviously he sees it from the other side of the coin. Seeing, and instead of seeing, because there's a really good documentary, you can find it on YouTube, of Jeremy Paxton. He's a British television presenter, if you don't know, because I know there's, outside of Britain, I don't know how many people know of him. Did a really good thing on sort of the legacy of the British Empire, and and I've mentioned this before. He was talking to a guy in Alexandria, an Egyptian, at a former British-only, whites-only social club that goes, back to the at least late imperial period in Egypt, but it's still going strong. And now it's entirely mixed, and mostly members are Egyptian. But they're sitting there and speaking in English, and this guy speaks the Egyptian, and I would say something of an upper class accent. I'm not well spoken, shall we say, without it's been a while since I've seen it. I don't know if you would quite say it was a British accent, but well spoken Egyptian gentleman wearing European style clothes, with a European style watch, so it may not be all British. They're speaking in English in Egypt, and Jeremy Paxton asks, well, did the British Empire do, and this is made in either, I think, the early 2000s, so this is in sort of this recent thought thing. Did the British Empire do any good for, you or Egypt, or some words to that effect? And the guy sort of, no, they didn't. It was, it wasn't good for Egypt. And so you got this guy sitting there speaking in English, wearing English-style clothes. And I said European, but, I don't know who the designer is and who the label it is, and they may be made in Egypt. But they're in British-style clothing, sitting in a British social club that's out by the pool that, in Alexandria, the sort of the British clubby sort of overseas thing that the Brits did, that this guy is sitting in this British cultural center that is now no longer racially divided, and I'm not arguing that I'm not arguing that it should be racially divided, it just no longer is, but they're enjoying very much and interacting in a British cultural sense. Now, maybe this guy, when he goes home or goes out on the street, he may revert, presumably when he talks to a lot of the locals, revert to Arabic in speaking, and maybe in Arabic in manners and other sorts of things. But he's interacting in a British way, in a British system. And so this system that did no good, he's still following. If it hurts every time I hit my toe with a hammer, I'm probably going to stop because it isn't doing me any good. Okay? So if there's, I don't know, some sort of food or some sort of language that that does no good. And this guy is also, he's a member of the club. So he voluntarily joins the club. He wasn't pulled in off the street. He wasn't, just somebody who, well, I was taught English in school, so I can speak it. but I hate the English, and I don't normally speak in English unless somebody speaks to me in it. No, it was somebody who's sitting around a British social club. So I don't know how many of the modern people watching it in Britain, the irony of the idea that this Egyptian gentleman, who was acting like a gentleman, doesn't think that the British Empire did any good. Now, maybe the harm to Egypt that the British did is outweighed, by any of the good that they did. We can talk about, Stalin built some useful canals that are still being used in modern Russia, and that was good. Yeah, but the harm, the thousands, tens of thousands who died building that particular canal isn't worth the good that it did. Now, of course, in a modern sense, you could build a canal with more modern machinery, with a lot less human deaths, because you figure a few people may die accidentally because of things, but, that. So the good of the canal may not be outweighed, and I'm not even talking the overall millions died in under Stalin's rule, but even in just the building of the canal, the good that it provides may not outweigh the bad that it did, but it still provides some good. And so, I'm not debating a reasonably well-educated Egyptian on whether the net, I have my own opinions, but whether they believe the net good versus the net bad, or however you want to say it, of British rule in Egypt is, how do the scales bounce? But did they do any good at all? Abso-freaking-lutely. And then they interviewed some Indian families. Was the British Empire good? And they're going, oh yes, it was wonderful. The British Empire was a wonderful thing. And of course, my friend Azads would think they're traitors. Now, these are British Indians who have now, and some of them were a bit older, so they could have very likely been born more in the Commonwealth, but by their English and from what they were talking about, at least some of them, they may have been born in Uganda, because there was a bunch of Indians that moved. Oh, Uganda's more over here again. No, Uganda is like Victoria right here, sort of. There was like a lot of Indian merchant class, shall we say, that were imported into Africa for a while until the Africans took power and kicked them all out. So that some of these Indians, that were born there and then later in life, and their children, their younger generation, was born in Britain, and others that Indians moved to West Indies. This is the East Indies. This, from here to here, is the West Indies. So that's why these are Indians. They're also Native Americans, but they're also Indians appropriately connected, though it was mostly used in the later form in this type of area. But if you look at Columbus, this was the Indies. That's coins the phrase, and so that becomes the West Indies. And so, there were a bunch that also, as a sort of a merchant class, were living in here. And a lot of them took advantage of the Commonwealth status in the 60s and 70s and whatnot, and moved to Britain. And so these Indians, East Indians, loved the British Empire, and not that they wouldn't say that there was bad things happening, but they benefited, and to the point that they are now British citizens and think of themselves now of Indian heritage, but now they think of themselves as British. So, yeah, seeing it from what Britain and other imperial powers did, seeing it from the other side may not always be, it may be a different picture of things. And yeah, and so I totally understand that. But that is, there are, like they say, two sides to the coin, and I think you can tell acknowledging that in all of these cases. But do you leave people in ignorance? Do you leave people in slavery? And I really have to wonder, and obviously you do it once and you'll never come back to any of them ever again because they'll find out about it. I would love to ask some questions of some, sort of middle left, not radical left, but middle left college students and ask some of these basic questions. If you have a society in which there is reasonably large-scale slavery, like the South in America, is it morally justified to go in and fight a war to free those slaves and then occupy and, in essence, oppress them to make sure that the slaves stay free? And I bet you I'll get an almost universal yes. And then if I were then explained that most American Indian tribes practice slavery, so then that justifies taking the American, or defeating the American Indians and conquering them. And I'm not talking about American Indian tribes, which some tribes did take black African by black African slaves, but it was quite common throughout all of these areas to raid and take captives of other peoples as slaves from other tribes. And that was going on long before the Europeans ever showed up. And it was common until the end of independent Indian culture. They were slave takers and slave holders. They would brand or scar the faces of their victims to show that they were slaves, because there wasn't enough necessarily genetic difference between them to like go, oh yeah, you're a slave and you're not. So they would do these kinds of things, and they were kept as slaves and captives and would be traded amongst themselves. This is something that most people don't know, and most Indians who sort of kind of know their history know that it was done but don't like to talk about. So that was a very, very common thing and I don't, I'm not going to say there wasn't a tribe that refused to do that. I don't know, but it was very common, from the Seminole Indians down in here to some of the, the Cherokees and others up in here, to the Apaches, and everywhere. And so they took captives, and the captives were functionarily slaves. So that would justify, not maybe justify all of what was done, massacres of women and children at times, and it did happen. Wasn't as quite as common or as routine as advocates want to make out, but it did happen. So, so it doesn't justify everything that was done, but it does justify conquering them and organizing them up into the American system. And again, it was done maybe in a very bad format, but it does justify the overall doing of it. People don't necessarily like when you criticize them on the internet, and even when you've sort of been sort of supportive of people and that, but then when you sort of say something, because I recently didn't realize it at first, but gotten blocked on Twitter from one account that just casually noticed things, and then I said, oh well, yeah, no, you don't, it was, conquering America wasn't stealing the land, it was conquering it. And somebody else, not the person that blocked it, saying, and I forget exactly what I said in entirety at the time, but pointing to, just because somebody else did the bad behavior doesn't justify America doing bad behavior. And I go, no, I think it's a good thing that America that the U.S. Americans, I'm sort of doing that as opposed to Native Americans, but the American government conquered America. I'm happy that they did so. I would not live in a house that was stolen by Nazis from Jews. I would refuse to do that. I would have to be in a complete sort of homeless, living on the streets situation and not able to move somewhere else. So I would not live in a stolen house from Jews. But I'm happy to live in America, because in my opinion is, if you're not happy with the American conquest of the Indians and taking the territory of California away from Mexico, you better get the hell out of California and get the hell out of America, because and now these people have been educated either with guilt and other things to feel that to be unproud of the American conquest of the North American continent. I am entirely proud of it. I am not saying I am proud of everything that was done in it during the conquest, but I am proud that they conquered and colonized and built America. and everybody here living here should be, and then okay, you can, yeah, there'll be some people that are too destitute to move, but there are other people that aren't too destitute that can move but won't, and so whether they're living a terrible a life of guilt or something, I don't know, but it's just, in my opinion, this blatant hypocrisy that these people have and live. And so I am proud that we conquered America, not ashamed or wanting to hide it. And so after pointing that out, I get blocked. Ah, there we go. Machine gun focus battalions. Don't know that Japan had them. I don't think they did. That doesn't mean they didn't, I just don't think so. Okay, oh, and we were going to start out, put pressure on Siam. Yes, how we got there. So, relations with Siam, +5. Japan loses 3 on neutrality. Japan gains 5 threat on Siam. We'll get Japan puts pressure on Siam event. Okay, we will do that. Okay, put pressure, the fall, growing pressure. Okay, same, we've seen that before. It was in that description. People don't always read the hover over, so putting up there, okay, was a perfect opportunity. Same thing. Okay, so we can do Japan becomes a puppet, or Siam becomes a puppet of Japan, or inherit Siam. Or does this is stop, right? Yeah. Oh no, it's just deselect. I don't know why you're moving where you're moving to. I don't know that it's any sort of good way. I think with a combination of this force, and let's take a look. Again, I'm not used to playing this, so this is partially just my trying to figure out what is going on, and partially, oh, we don't yet see this well. Okay, we can let this hang here for a moment. I just want to make sure that we can see into these territories a bit better. Still not. I think we can keep it as a puppet. I think the reason to having it inherit it, and I bet you if I look at the code, it would be a very high chance to inherit it, would be for the AI to do it, just because we know that the AI doesn't necessarily, defend, send down, Japan wouldn't send down reinforcements to invade Malaya or Burma. Well, so we're going to stick with becomes a puppet. Now, one thing there may be maybe somebody wants to post it below. I don't know, because I'm making this actually about an hour and 20 minutes now before it's supposed to be released, so it won't be released. It'll be late, because if you're that close to watching. And yes, there's a bunch of you I noticed that do watch right within the first hour. Okay, good. They're still within command range. We can definitely watch before too long, but I'd sort of like to get these guys into, because I think when I formed this into the Axis and have the not just to have the nice black thing, but just to show that they're all Axis powered. Partially because I want, I want the Soviets to feel threatened by the border here with Meizheng, you know, and if I had, I don't know that I'm ever going to form, well, I might inform Manchukuo at some point, but technically, as I think of it still there, it's just highly integrated puppet, but to have that sort of territorial threat of an Axis threat to the Soviets, so they put troops on more of the border. So yeah, so if there's like a console code thing, oh certainly you can have supplies. Oh, and I was of course reminded now. Having we've got a lot of excess supply production still. Well, we don't, but in all this, so I think what we're going to do is cut down a bit more dramatically. Not entirely. I suggested to go even lower, I know. Because it's keeping some troops in here sort of keeps them maybe feeding off of these other people's supplies, but I'm not entirely sure of that, because traded away supplies, convoyed out, into network, used, returned to stockpile. I'm not quite sure for some of our puppets, but so we've inherited these forces, which is going to get these guys marching out, but and so with them and these guys, let's see, well, they have Thai infantry divisions, so this is will be not seen as a Japanese unit, so it won't, to the best of my understanding of the rules and I'm the way that it's worked, this will be seen as sort of like a foreign expeditionary corps, meaning as I improve the Japanese units here, you know, with better and better stats, this won't get any better. You see him there with some sort of semi-American type uniform with a British, oh god, I'm bad at the models of Enfield rifles. That's one model of Enfield rifle there. That, I believe, is the World War I type standard model in some of the interwar period. But they go to a more simplified production model, and you see they no longer run the barrel shroud and whatnot all the way out to the end, so the barrel sticks out more and whatnot, and it's easier production, which is more the World War II style. But he's sort of an American type uniform and semi-motorized infantry brigade, as we see. So these aren't proper Japanese units, but they will benefit, I do believe, from all the doctrinal improvements, but not from like improved artillery or improved infantry weapons. So the command structures get improved, but not the weapon systems. They're sort of locked in history now. Okay, yeah, we'll improve artillery unit training, but they will prove a help. And we have already moved a bunch of a Marine Corps, and let's move it, well, we'll see about what we want to attach it down to here, getting ready for the idea of invading places from here. And so now we have more puppets. CAG fighter focus. That is, no, carrier. Here, okay, yep, that's way too far in advance. Now let's move to CAG bomber focus. That's CAG, if you didn't know, stands for Carrier Air Group. I always have to wonder about, you know, and I know I can say it now again, sure, I'd love to hear something about your understanding. Would like supplies for money? Certainly. Croatia is mobilizing its armed forces. Oh yeah, we forgot to look here. Showing the last episode. Okay, nothing's really happening with Finland yet, though this was an event-given unit up there. And we're seeing the Italiano-German invasion of Yugoslavia. Germany has loaned out, it looks like, the Großdeutschland unit to Hungary. How interesting. And loaned out some Faglin's SS cavalry as well to Hungary. Or is that Slovakia's colors? Maybe that's Slovakia. Soviets. Oh, sure. Siam is mobilizing its forces. Don't know why, but yes, you're in there. You're in the Axis, so you can do so, but we're not planning on going to war soon. And Costa Rica, yes. No, no. Okay, machine gun focus has advanced for fighters. Okay, yeah, better machine guns. No, I think we'll come over here and improve some of our infantry elements. Italian light armor's moved down. Sweden is mobilizing. Now, have they joined a faction? Not yet. But I could understand them with war on their border between two other nations. They're deciding to mobilize. Capital ship damage control. I believe that's probably going to be, yes, grayed out. I just don't know reducing the cost to build is worth increasing or decreasing our sea defense for improved non-Vickers armor. I don't know. I don't get all of that, quite honestly. I don't get all of that. I get here for special treatment the idea that you get more strength, and it costs more ICs to build. So that, and as you go through the stages, you get more and more on each stage. I get that. This one is cemented armor, which just increases air defense and sea defense, with no increase in build cost. But this is what I believe Japan did do. But I don't get... I get the reduction in, as you get more and more levels of this, in cost. But I don't know why it would necessarily reduce defense. Having more levels of it. Having more new armor. Or more advanced versions of the armor. Yeah, I get more advanced production facility. See, I get the idea here that if you get more advanced armor treatments, either you can do it better, so you're better at making the armor as you advanced in it. Get that. I just don't get to. As you get better at it, you get less sea defense, that it's weaker. That's why I've not pursued this, and I'm sort of regretting even doing the basics of it. Because yes, I want to build speed, or build cost reduction. See, now I could see the idea of reducing the build cost and increasing the length of production, or decreasing the length of production and increasing the build cost, or something like that. I get the idea that there isn't necessarily and I don't know all the different stuff. And there's more than these three. And I bookmarked, I think, maybe I don't know if I saved a graphic off of it, but I know I bookmarked a U.S. Navy report that was, a chart, that had, maybe down this side was the different types of armor, and along here was either ranges and or gun calibers or something like that, or maybe reversed. I forget. Yeah, I don't know. Like at 500 yards, a 5-inch round fired at some thickness of armor. And they went into, I think it was 6 different armor types that they had acquired. You know, so like the German, the Japanese, the British, the American, and you know, so they did say like special treatment or whatever, or cemented armor, German made, or you know, or something like that, and special cemented armor Italian made, or whatever it was, and it doesn't matter what it was. But so that tells me that I think this report was done sometime in 45. It was a very technical analysis of effectiveness of certain gun calibers against a certain thickness of armor fired at it by the various different armoring systems, because as some Niagara was pointed out, Black Ice architectural lessons or something in one of my recent episodes, but there's obviously different types of armor. It's not just 3 inches of armor. Well, we know, I don't know if because I read an article on it, not that was, you know, a relatively modern something within the last 30 years, talking about some of the where is it up here? Talking about some of the steel that was coming out of this part of Sweden that has basically all been played out. It was something of a natural alloy that I don't think they're entirely sure what the alloy was. You know, what it was mixed with. I'm not saying they don't have a clue, but it was just, you know, sort of my level of an article, not some super technical thing. But it was, you know, and they may like know that it had a certain amount of tungsten in it, or a certain amount of something in it, but exactly what the sort of natural ratios and maybe other trace minerals that really made the steel in its heyday coming out of here really, really good. But if you're doing machine tools, some of the best cutting tools are made out of tungsten. You know, what we're seeing with this special thing here. Effect, or whatever you want to call that on the map, is coming out of that. Tungsten is really good, but if you're using tungsten to cut particularly hard steels, but any steel or any metals really, it'll slowly wear in and of itself, and you'll need to resharpen it, and sharpening it cuts more, you know, grinds more of it off to it, and it's generally not needed to be pure tungsten. So you normally take tungsten and mix it with some steel to get really good cutting tools. Well, that's also the same metal that you want to use for armor piercing rounds and for armor. And of course, there's different ratios, meaning if you don't have enough if you put in too much tungsten, I don't know that it's, you know, pure tungsten armor would be better, but there's some sort of golden ratios of different things in different countries, but you can't always get enough tungsten to put in all your tanks, so you sort of do it. So tungsten. Now, they've also come up in this time period, too, with I have trouble saying this, molybdenum. It's something that people in the past had mistaken either for graphite or lead. Well, you get it as a byproduct, generally speaking, from refining copper. It is often mixed in and around with the deposits of copper. It is a lead-like substance, and times have been refined and used for a writing instrument like a pencil. Most modern pencils are graphite, but in the old past they were often lead in the center. And so people didn't realize that it was different. But molybdenum is different than lead, and molybdenum mixed with steel makes a alloy pretty damn good as a replacement or substitute for tungsten. Not as good as tungsten, but if you don't have a supply of tungsten, or tungsten is just too expensive to use it generally for this, not just the armor on the battleship, which is the thick bits, but just the general steel plating on it and the frame and other stuff that's different than like the super high pressures of a gun barrel or something. But you want some level of armor. Molybdenum is a very good substitute on some ratios for the steel. But as you can sort of tell, what I'm saying here is the pressures and the qualities needed for the gun barrels of a 18-inch gun on a Japanese super heavy battleship, or even on a 5-inch gun on a destroyer, need to be a lot more than the standard hull plating on like a destroyer, which is not considered armor. It'll stop a machine gun bullet, generally speaking, but won't stop a heavier thing at all. I mean, even like a 1 or 2 inch type shell, let alone a 5 or 6 inch shell. But then there may be armored up sections on a destroyer or on a battleship that are, you know, covering vital bits and pieces of the ship, but that armor isn't probably as strong and hard as the gun barrels. At least it shouldn't be, because you should get stronger stuff for the gun barrels. So there's all this kinds of stuff. So it's not just, oh, the battleship Yamato had 16 inches of armor belt plate. So is that 16 inches as good as 16 inches of armor plate on the American Wisconsin battleship? Or I don't know how thick. It probably wasn't 16 inches, 8 inches of armor or something. Thick bits of armor on its armor belt, but however thick it is. You know, is that 8 inches or 16 inches or whatever as good as the American? You know, and if it's crappy armor, American 6-inch armor may be stronger than Japanese 8-inch armor, or something like that. And the American Navy needed to know this, and the American Navy, so they needed to know what to be able to penetrate. But they also wanted to know, well, just how good was the armor? And, you know, in the after effect, maybe it's better than ours. Maybe ours is better than it, you know. And so they were really doing research towards the end and post-World War II, because this was sometime dated in 45 I was looking at. And I don't know, either it's said and I didn't pay attention, or I don't know whether it was early enough in 45 that the war was still going on, or this was something done in the immediate aftermath of the Japanese surrender. But obviously, when it was done, I do believe the Germans had already surrendered. So they had already captured sections of German battleships and, you know, sectioned out some of the German stuff to fire guns at. So that they were very much doing that. And so this armor stuff here is a very real variant between nation to nation, that I just don't get the idea of why advancing this, yes, it reduces costs, but why would it necessarily? Because this is just improving the system, is how I would look at it, not cheapening out on the system. But maybe that's what they view it. You know, again, bad armor, yeah, whatever. Okay, damn. Oh, that's where we were. Damage control, our capital. So, let's see if we can find other sort of damage and other control, like here. To shift this too. I'll no longer receive money for those supplies. Okay. And yes, I think about all these things and I research all these things at different times, you know. Armor, and I wasn't necessarily specific. I was thinking something about ship armor at the time, but I, you know, Googling and ran across it on the internet and bookmarked it for future reference if I needed it. But yeah, I pay too much attention to this stuff. I don't know if that's a good thing for modding. Probably a good thing for modding, because if you're into attention to detail, that is a general good thing. I want to look at the infrastructure levels that we can see. Okay, so all through here, we look like we can get through the infrastructure. Good. When it just gets dark, we just can't see into it. So I'm looking at territories we control that are too much. And we'll have to swing down forces, and that's sort of what I was waiting with some of these guys here. I'm going to, unlike the AI, move a bunch of this stuff via the sea down to here and be ready to invade. But for talking to you, I know some of you I talk too much. Not that I'm talking too much, but I'm pausing the game and the game isn't flowing. So not that they don't necessarily, we would give them supplies for money, sure, that they don't want to hear me, but they want to have a more flowing game, and I do get that. I really do, and it is important. Okay, encryption machine advanced, very good. It'll be harder for them basically to find our subs, because that's sort of that. type thing as best they could come up with for effects, and that is a fairly decent thing. Done it different, obviously, in Hearts of Iron 4. Probably the Hearts of Iron 4 is better in that, but and single engine armament research. Okay, so yeah, this we're shifting over here to do the anti-tank weapons. But I think on that note, we're going to end the episode here. I want to thank you all for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. I do appreciate that. We give them a supply, sure. If you're still here, please subscribe to the channel. I'm sure you'll love to hear me talk on about things more, if you made it this far. And I love your comments on all of these subjects, corrections. I love to learn things. So see you next time for more Hearts of Iron.